First off, this is just a recent video that I came across, so the sites presented in it are not really relevant. This could be from more or less any other group, and you could even reverse the roles of the two groups here. The main differences are usually just superficial in style, while the end product and quite a few underlying patterns are just the same, which is that they often fail to reach the other side, for which this video from this Q&A that I came across is just a really great example. When you talk with a stranger who has opposing views to yours, it can already be extremely tricky when you talk with them one on one in private, and a careless remark, as minor as it may seem, can already lead to the other person to stop listening to what you are trying to communicate. In a public forum like this, it is even much more important to avoid anything that could cause this to happen. It is important to make the audience member feel safe, respected, and especially that they feel understood. Otherwise, they will just get stressed and raise their defenses, and little if anything you say will reach them, which will usually also be true for more or less everyone who believes the same as that audience member. So if you push them away, you usually push away the whole group. To avoid that, it is important to really listen to what they are saying, then to at least appear to take what they have said serious, and to agree with those parts of what they have said that you can agree with. And best case, also provide one or two examples of what you just agreed to of your own, which will show them that you understood them and strengthen the feeling of being understood and taken serious by you in them. From there, you can then slowly add information that is contrary to their beliefs, but not by throwing the information at them, but by asking them leading questions. That makes it much more likely that they will be able to receive and process that information. Because even when someone confronts you with information that you already know and wants you to reply to it, even when you are very intelligent, if you want to provide them with a somewhat sensible answer, it will take a few moments to formulate that reply internally. Now, if the information is new for you, formulating a sensible answer will take quite a bit longer. And if they throw five different facts at you that you have never heard of, each of which would require at least some research and writing a small article for a sensible reply to it, and they keep on talking, interrupting you, and switching the subject, your chances to process this on the spot well enough to formulate a sensible reply will become slimmer and slimmer over time. If they also make derogative jokes and remarks about you during all of this, and there is an audience that is laughing at those derogative jokes at your expense, that will likely only decrease those chances even further. With that, you could probably watch the video on your own now if you want to and see how they failed at reaching that audience member for yourself. The link to it is in the description. I will still go over the video, of course. In it, the audience member they are talking to had seemingly interrupted Candace Owen during her speech with an emotional outburst. And given that, this already tells you to be even more careful if you want to reach them. So even seemingly irrelevant small details can make a huge difference, especially because they can build up over time. With that, let's get into it.
I just need to know what exactly you've seen when you've said that is an example of toxic masculinity.
I think men feeling that they need to dominate spaces physically and speaking over women, interrupting women, belittling them.
Here is the first little problem. The audience laughing at what she just said, which sends the message that she isn't being taken serious. When you're the one on the stage, how you react to this is extremely important because you have the biggest influence to communicate that this behavior isn't okay. When you just let it happen, or worse, join the laughter, you're essentially signaling to everyone that this is okay. And everyone, of course, includes yourself, because we humans are constantly programming ourselves with our behavior. So either you react to this openly, and a simple please with a small hand gesture and a serious look can be enough to achieve this, or you signal it by ignoring the laughter completely while keeping your focus on the audience member, and maybe adding an encouraging please continue to it, which also communicates that the laughter was something that you didn't approve of. While body language can be interpreted very differently, I'd say that the small twitching of the corners of her mouth could be a sign that this was already something she had to deal with internally. But either way, being laughed at this way is sure not a pleasant experience. But on to the next one.
Yeah.
Do you see how good I'm being?
I mean, you can.
A small joke can lighten the mood, so this one was kinda okay. Well, at least okay-ish. As it was kinda ridiculing what she believes, which can be used to reach someone when done right, but even if we assume that this was his intent, it didn't really seem to have worked here.
You just said when men interrupt and dominate spaces. Were you a toxic feminist when you interrupted me when I was on stage?
No, I was interrupting something.
They all believe that Candace Owen made a really good point there. Just that, well, just imagine you're sitting next to a friend who is having a serious conversation with someone that they are trying to reach and they have just made a really good point. What's a mature and sensible reaction if you want to help that friend to reach that person? Best case, to give that person the space they need to process it, by staying quiet and keeping a friendly or at least neutral facial expression, while looking at the person in an encouraging way to support them. You wouldn't jump up laughing, scream in your face at them, and then try to high five your friend. That would only push that person away and alienate them. Again, the person on the stage has a much bigger position of power than a single audience member, which brings a lot of responsibility with it. There is no concern for that audience member in their faces or whether that information managed to reach her, but only a "you got her with that one" in it, which shows especially in Charlie Kirk's grin there. They were all really happy with that argument there, even though it wasn't actually that good, at least the way it was made. I mean, Candace Owens somewhat tried to reach her with it, but it was going too much against that audience member's belief. Whether this belief is true or not is irrelevant here, but that for her, this is a widespread social problem that she's certain of. So this single showcase of her interrupting Candace Owen won't make any sense for her as an argument, and I'm pretty sure this is also why the audience member answers the way she does here.
The fact that you're a woman is completely irrelevant to me.
But maybe
what
it's
you're
irrelevant
both
to men as well when they interrupt people.
That's
Men
not the
interrupt other
case.
men interrupt
That's
women.
not the case.
We're
There is a
society.
culture of men's voices being valued more than women.
It doesn't seem to make any sense that she would deny this, but I think the example had thrown her off too much. Like, she was first trying to explain the difference in her own interrupting, and when the question came, she was already quite overwhelmed and back in the mindset of the widespread social problem. Like, I'm pretty sure that the audience member wouldn't have denied this if it had been presented in the right way and she had had time to process it. And again, if you don't manage to reach the audience member, you will probably also fail to reach most other people who believe what she does as well. Here you have all of the others laughing at her again. There, in the person sitting second from the right, you can see an emotional body motion. A calm and collected person wouldn't make such a motion. Just imagine yourself making that movement with your hands this way, together with the facial expression. Again, even seemingly irrelevant small stuff does accumulate, and that sure signals again to the audience member that she is not being understood and taken serious. And it is also important to show that those people on the stage are acting out of emotion as well, since that is what they are accusing the audience member of.
What is your metric for
Give
this?
us one piece of data.
Yeah,
one.
like a data.
Any piece
You can't
of data.
just say there's a culture of men interrupting women. What's your data point?
Here they are asking for her data, which, in a way, okay, fair enough. Just that she's just an audience member, while they do this, at least to some degree, for a living. They are prepared for this and know a lot of facts they can present to people, which adds to them having a bigger position of power, and thereby responsibility on that stage. As Rabbit Zachariah so nicely brought it to the point, you don't answer a question, you answer a person. So if you don't manage to get to what's behind the question and where the person is coming from, you can answer the question seemingly perfect on the surface, but still not reach the person with it. While the audience member hadn't asked a question, the principle still applies to understand where she is coming from and to react to that. But, well, they have just asked her a question, which shows where they are coming from, which is that they are only really interested in the data and not, or at least barely, in her as a person, which is why they are all failing so hard to actually reach her.
For
Any
this.
kind of interpretivist data where you're looking at interactions, at dynamics, you can see. I mean, what do you want me to say? Like a
Like
statistic?
a fact?
Yeah.
Any fact.
Any kind of.
How about the stuff Dominique
analysis
The like effect was really badly phrased, as it had a derogatory undertone to it. But here we actually have one of the few positive examples from this video, which started with him quickly rephrasing it to any fact instead, with his statement, like the stuff Dominique said, he was then making a step in her direction, trying to help her to answer by providing an example for her. His facial expression is also much more welcoming and positive here. Just that, sadly, it doesn't stay that way. And also, at that point, the audience member was already extremely stressed and defensive, which you can hear from the tone of her yes there.
Huge cultural example,
interaction.
maybe.
So can I ask a question? Do you think we live in a patriarchy?
Yes.
It was a leading question, as it was very likely she would answer with yes there, and I do believe that he had probably a positive intention there of reaching her with the facts he then listed, as this has maybe worked in the past for him. Although it is still very unlikely that it worked every time, so it is not unlikely that this is just all that he is able to do, well, in a setting like this with someone from the opposing side at least. But just from the tonality of her yes, with its anger and impatient, you can see that she is clearly not in a state in which she would take in any facts that are opposing her view. Well, if you just throw them at her like they did.
Why do women live longer than men? Why are men more likely to commit suicide? Why do women
I'll tell
compose
you- I'll
50+%
tell
of
you
college
Why do we
graduates?
control 89% of the spending power within households if men are the ones that are going out and making all of the money,
Because
as we like to
women
say?
have the sole responsibility of caring for the house and the children.
So
that
it's a
they're not
patriarchy that
working.
allows women a lot of responsibility.
Within a household, within a certain sphere, not a powerful one. The household is not
Then
a
why are
powerful
majority of
sphere.
business startups women, majority of master's degrees, and majority of
And
doctorate
also,
degrees
can
in
I
the
say
States?
the thing about women living longer, married women live the least long. Unmarried women live longest because they do not have the responsibilities, the emotional labor.
That it wasn't just one person presenting the facts is also a big problem, as in a situation like this, it can easily create the impression of them ganging up on you, especially for someone who is already as stressed as this audience member. Even though it's been ages that I've seen any of Rabbit Zachariah's videos, making this reminded me of him again, just because of how much better they were doing in contrast to this. In his talks, there are also sometimes several people on the stage, but when an audience member asked a question, it was every time I seen it that only one of them stood up to reply, and if another one of them wanted to add something, they would usually wait their turn until the first one had finished and then stand up. So it was always a one-on-one scenario for the audience member. But anyway, she's doing her best to reply to those facts when
Of being
Marriage
with a
is
man.
emotional labor.
Pardon?
Marriage is emotional labor for women, and that's
That's a great point.
What?
they pick her up on a single statement again, and in a really bad way at that. Just look at her body language. Again, this hand gesture of, I can't believe you just said that, which again is emotional, not rational. And the statement isn't even wrong, so they also missed a perfect opportunity to agree with her. And one of their statements shows that they actually are agreeing with her, but they just threw it at her, which was that it is emotional labor for both of them, which means that it is also emotional labor for the woman, which makes the emotional reaction from the second from the right even more emotional. If you believe that it is emotional labor for both sides, why the emotional reaction to marriage being emotional labor for women? This seemingly triggered something in her, I would guess. Just watch the follow up there.
No, because the way that women support men, like, it's a huge
thought we
burden.
live in a
They support
patriarchy.
each
I'm not
other.
saying no, they don't.
She even jumps up slightly there and lets out an audible laugh, while before it was just a hand gesture with a wide grin, which was already a sign for an emotional reaction. But now it went up a level. And just a few seconds later, we have a big one from Charlie. Just watch.
Reason for
Because
why
you're
I
all
could never be
emotion,
a feminist
no
because
facts.
everything that I just couldn't. It's like
He was talking over Candace Owen there and said, because you're all emotions, no facts. Just from the words themselves, even without the body language, you can already see that this was clearly an emotional outburst. Just try to say those words in a completely neutral way, like this. Because you're all emotions, no facts. See, it just doesn't fit to say them without emotion, because it's an emotional outcry. You're all emotions, no facts. But his body language clearly shows that as well. First, a quick hand motion, then he jumps up, and then he puts his hand on his head. The way he did them, each of them would have been enough on their own to know that he is emotional in that moment and not acting out of a rational train of thought. Yet, from the content of those words, it is only the audience member he's accusing of being emotional, while he probably thinks of himself as being completely rational. I would guess that there is some projection going on there, but either way, it is sure not helping to reach that audience member. I think this was also a small breaking point for him in regards to how he sees that audience member, leading to a much bigger one later on.
you don't really know why you're calling it toxic. You did the
No,
exact
I
same
do.
thing,
I
but
know
you decided that
exactly
when
why
men
I'm calling it
interrupt, it's
toxic.
because you're a woman.
Quite amusing that Candace Owen points this out just a few moments later. You did the exact same thing, but when men interrupt, well, Charlie did the exact same thing, but when the other side is emotional, well, anyway. That one aside, this was extremely bad from Candice here, and I wonder if that breaking point was something that happened to all of them, like a subconscious collective agreement, because she just walks over the audience member there. And all of this following the remark about emotional labor from women. Again, right at the start, the audience laughs at the audience member. They did nothing, but laugh about her themselves. They talk over her, interrupt her, pick out single statements from her, switch the subject, overload her with information without giving her the feeling that she's being understood and respected by them. And then Candy says to her, you don't really know why you're calling it toxic, after she never really had an actual chance to explain anything. And that statement is bad enough just on its own, even when you are not a big part of the reason why the other person wasn't able to make any sense for you in the first place. Just listen to what Candace Owens is adding to this.
But you decided that when you interrupt, it's just because you had a differing opinion.
You asked me for one example.
I know. And then you say stuff about the marriage and breakdown as an emotional labor. There are women, just so you know, that aspire to get married and have children and stay at home and raise good children. And that's okay. So, but why are you now making it seem like that puts us in a position that's less than man? Want to create a society? Be the person that raises every individual that's in society. Feminism has made it seem like there's something wrong with being a mother, that there's something wrong with being a wife. And everything that you just said is that.
In some way, it was probably already there at the beginning, but only to some very small degree. But I'd say that the breaking point before was also when they started to see her more and more as a personification of feminism and less as a person. Just take the last thing Candace Owens said to her there. And everything that you just said is that. Yet the only thing loosely in that direction was her statement that marriage is emotional labor for women. When Candace said that there are women who aspire to marry and have children, the audience member even instantly said that this was okay. And not in any way derogatory, but more like a matter of factly, of course it's okay.
Wrong with being a mother, that there's something wrong with being a wife. And everything that you just said is that.
This small part that happened in there is also a good showcase. The audience member was denying what was said to her by Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk just says, yes, with a huge grin and a strong nodding motion, which I think kinda speaks for itself.
No, I'm not. Please don't tell me that I'm sitting here because I'm sitting here because I worked hard. I was personally responsible. I'm not sitting here because of feminism. No, I am not sitting here because of any feminist. Trust me.
Another audience member said to Candace Owens that she's only sitting there because of feminism, and her reply is another good example for how they failed to reach their opposing side. And also a good example for Candace Owens reacting emotional, as her tone of voice was much harder and much more tense when she replied to this than how she talked before. But in regards to her reply, it was completely talking past the point that the audience member was trying to make there. I'm not sitting here because of feminism, but because I worked hard. Well, yes, from a certain perspective, that is certainly true. But from the feminist perspective, the reason why a woman is able to sit on such a stage in the first place is because of the work that feminists have done in the past, so that they now have the right to do so. Again, whether this is actually true or not is irrelevant here, just that this is what the other side believes, and that Candace's reply was not addressing this at all.
So, can I ask, can a man
Yeah, but
ask a question?
feminism is supposed to be about choice, and what radical feminism is actually doing.
Here Charlie is imitating an impatient child in primary school and saying, "Can a man ask a question?" Again, not helpful.
Can I give you some facts, though, to support this? No? You don't want to hear from a man? Okay. Wait, you see how things get really dangerous and you start to generalize men and women all of a sudden, like you did?
I just wanted to continue the conversation that I was having
you can
with
talk
Candace.
We'll talk about facts later. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
This one was just extremely bad as a whole. You don't want to hear it from a man? She hadn't said that in any way, yet he ignores that and acts as if she had, trying to put a moral lesson on top of it, which would only make sense if she had actually said this. Then, his statement, "We talk about facts later." That was just completely derogatory. I'm the only one with facts here. I'm the only one who's rational. Well, a mature, collected and rational person wouldn't have said that. And if there had been one of those on that stage, they would have severely reprimanded him for it, if not have him removed from that stage completely. When you say something like that, you no longer care about reaching the other person. And even just not saying anything against this would already be a silent agreement to it. Yet, they even laughed about it.
I understand that some women want a family and they want to be mothers. I completely respect that. All feminism is doing is
Here you can see that the audience member has now put her hands on her head, which I think was done for comfort, like a sign that she's really struggling now to keep it together.
I just think that the values, you referenced the Gillette advert, all it was saying was, the message was fundamentally just stop being violent, just...
No, it
wasn't.
No,
About 8 minutes in, and only now they get to what this was seemingly actually about for that audience member. Something that Candy said about the Gillette advert, I think. And despite everything that has happened so far, this could have still been a chance to reach her. Instead of instantly blurting out, "No, it's not," they could have just at least partly agreed with her, and from there slowly changed course.
movement Oh, so you agree with it? Okay.
The men have done a lot
can you repeat
historically.
what you just said?
They've won every single war, every freedom that we have
Can
in
you
society
repeat what
is
you
because
just
of
said?
men.
I said it's because white men have historically done so much shit. They're just
So
asking
you
you to
do
stop
agree
for
with the
once.
anti-male posture. So your
No,
true
I
radical
don't.
feminism
I don't
comes
agree
out
with it.
after 10 minutes of cross-examination. Before you said, I have no problem with men. Now you said
you're
it's
saying
because
you
white
do.
men have done a lot of shit.
Yeah, but-
Now we get to revealing who you really are,
But
which
that
is
is
a
what
hateful,
feminism is.
angry person.
Here's another mischance. Instead of agreeing with her, this is where Charlie Kirk even reached his big breaking point. Just watch how it starts.
Movement. Oh, so you agree with it? Okay.
The men have done a
Can
lot
you repeat what
historically.
you just said?
He instantly switches from a serious explaining facial expression to a laughing outcry, and from that instantly back to serious again. So he's concentrating on what he's talking, then he hears something that she says, which makes him really happy, because for him, that was the statement from her that allowed him to treat her fully as the enemy. And again, that laughing outburst, an emotional reaction, not a rational one.
Okay.
The men have done a lot
Can you repeat what you
historically.
just said?
They've won every single war, every freedom that we have in
Can you
society
repeat what
is
you
because
just
of
said?
men.
There is the instant switch to serious, because he really wants her to repeat that, to have it confirmed by her. Twice he asked her to do so, with a very serious facial expression. Can you repeat what you just said? Can you repeat what you just said?
I said it's because white men have historically done so much shit. They're just
So
asking
you
you to
do
stop
agree
for
with the
once.
anti-male posture. So your
No,
true
I
radical
don't. I
feminism
don't
comes
agree
out
with it.
after 10 minutes of cross-examination. Before you said, I have no problem with men. Now you said
you're
it's
saying
because
you
white
do.
men have done a lot of shit.
Yeah, but-
Now we get to revealing who you really are,
But
which
that
is
is
a
what
hateful,
feminism is.
angry person.
Your true radical feminism comes out, and now she's the enemy, the boogeyman, the full representation of radical feminism. And all she said was that white men have historically done a lot of poop, which is a true statement. Humanity as a whole has done a huge amount of bad stuff over the course of history, of all colors and races, or however you want to categorize them, which includes white men, which means that would have been another great opportunity to agree with her, then provide one or two examples of how white men have messed up, to strengthen the feeling that she's being understood, and then, through slowly asking her questions, enter the idea into the conversation that maybe it wasn't just white men who have messed up over the course of history, but that acting that way could be a possibility seemingly didn't even exist for them. In regard to the issues that are important to them, they don't even want to move one bit towards her, as if giving in just a tiny bit by agreeing with her would mean to agree with her completely. That's a level of defensiveness that is close to paranoia, and sure not a sign of a healthy and mature individual, but of someone who is acting out of a trauma, be it individual or a collective one.
They just hate men. There is no other
No,
platform.
They don't hate men. They're just.
You just
there's
said-
no problem. There is no problem with analysing the actions of men in history and condemning them.
You mean like
What
winning
about all the
World
good
War II?
ones?
What
What about all the good ones?
At that stage, it has now become extremely obvious. They don't care about what the audience member is saying, and they don't want to even recognize anything sensible she is saying. They just don't want to give in at all. Her statement there, that there is no problem with analyzing the actions of men and condemning them, implying that doing so doesn't necessarily mean that you hate all men, was perfectly reasonable. Yet, they didn't care about that. For them, she's now an evil man-hating radical feminist, and that reasonable statement of hers was going completely against that. So they weren't able to recognize it as such, as that would have shattered that made-up image of hers in their minds. Again, this was an opportunity to agree with her, yet they instantly go against it. Candace, what about all the good ones? Was less spoken, but rather shot out instantly.
Yeah, women have
They
never
took the
started wars, but wars have never been fought over women in this country. That never happened, Henry VIII. Right?
A derogatory sarcastic remark from Charlie Kirk there. And while sarcasm can be used to reach someone when done right, that's really not the case here. Just look at him and listen to the tone of his voice. He's really pleased with himself there. What he's communicating there is not, hey, you could also see it this way, but rather, you're an idiot. And as you can see from the reaction of the audience member, that was also really not a good example for either reaching her as an individual, nor the other side as a group.
What's the point?
Because he was an adulterer. I mean, that's a terrible example.
Do you
What,
think
wanted
that,
to
that
shag
women? Let me
around
ask you a
and have a
question.
male
Do you
heir.
think
That's an
women can
awful
have done
example.
anything wrong, or that women can do anything wrong? Like, would you have been okay if there was like a strict razor commercial, like about toxic femininity? Would that have been okay with you?
Another attempt from Candace Owens in reaching the audience member, While she also has made quite a few mistakes, chances are quite good that this would have been a lot more positive if Charlie Kirk hadn't been on that stage as well, or if she had just been alone. But Charlie was the main one messing up the atmosphere of that conversation. Just watch his next one.
Tell me what you think toxic femininity
Accusing
is.
men of things that never happen and
Yeah.
calling it sexual
Like
assault.
what?
Like Brett Kavanaugh.
Seen how hardened his posture and voice been when he said Brett Kavanaugh? Even though I had no idea who Charlie Kirk was and only know his name because it is shown in the video, I did a quick search for him, and apparently he has been doing this for a while at that stage. Which means he could have already known how she would react to him bringing up that specific example. And personally, I don't care either way. Horrible things are happening on this planet in every single moment, so I see no sense in getting upset about a single example. But probably most people of his opposing side do believe that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty, and bringing him up in that context will trigger them to some degree. So this was, well, it feels like he was actually doing this on purpose to achieve the result you're seeing there.
He is an awful man and a rapist.
Wait, he's a what? He's an honorable
awful man. An awful man.
Honorable.
Her hand shot up instantly to her head, as if she couldn't believe that he would bring that example. And yet, especially considering all that had happened before already, she handled it really well, I would say. But what he then did in reaction to her, mishearing someone on purpose and then saying the wrong thing over her still speaking. She says, an awful man. He says, what? An honorable man? With that, he managed to reach the level of a child in kindergarten. I mean, how many mature grown-ups do you know who would do something like that in a similar fashion in a serious discussion in which they want to reach the other person? The only way to top this would have been to stick out his tongue and say, "Bah, you stupid." He was acting like a maladjusted child throughout this video, getting worse and worse over time. And that's not the kind of behavior you want present from a grown-up when trying to lead a serious discussion. But that at the end is the reason why it's so extremely important to pay attention and react to even seemingly small and irrelevant details before they manage to build up over the course of the discussion, as they did here, starting with letting the audience just laugh at that audience member. Considering how well that audience member was still reacting towards the end, despite how stressed she was and despite being in a much worse position than those on the stage, who also had most of the audience on their side, it wouldn't have taken much to lead a sensible and fruitful conversation with her. An excuse people often bring up in this context is, but the other person did this and that. Well, if the other person has done something worthy of criticism, and you do something similar in reaction to it, then you too have done something worthy of criticism. And stooping to the other person's level sure doesn't make you the more mature person. Which didn't even happen here, as that audience member was from all of them the one who was trying the most to lead a sensible conversation here, no matter what you think of the content of what she was saying. I also want to add that it is not my intent to put down Charlie Kirk or any of the others for their behavior there. Acting out of emotion and from being triggered is perfectly normal human behavior. I was merely pointing it out, as seemingly a lot of people who are watching these videos aren't aware that these things are happening, especially when it is a person of the same group that they associate with. And neither do they seem to be aware of how a healthy and mature person would act in those situations. And if you happen to be from the opposing side there, as I said at the beginning, which side is actually on the stage there is barely relevant, as the outcome is usually very similar, with only the style on the surface being somewhat different. Although, well, I should also add that this having been a group probably made it a lot worse, as each of them would probably have been much better if they had been alone. But that it was that bad is what made it such a perfect showcase for how not to do it. And it would have needed a really exceptionally healthy, mature, and confident person on that stage to turn that dynamic around. Although that person would have probably already done something against the laughter from the audience and the other three persons on that stage right at the start. Oh well, that's it.